Black woman barred from entering the luxury private jet. Moments later, she fires the entire team. On a quiet day at an exclusive airport terminal, a seemingly ordinary woman walks in only to be humiliated and dismissed by the staff. But what they didn't know was the storm they were about to unleash upon themselves. What happens next is a story of power, justice, and transformation that will leave you speechless. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. If you love inspiring stories of resilience and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support helps us share these impactful stories with even more people. Now let's get into it. The air was crisp and carried the faint scent of jet fuel as Amelia Horton stepped out of her sleek black town car. She adjusted her silk scarf and clutched the leather strap of her briefcase, the weight of it familiar and grounding. Amelia wasn't a stranger to luxury, but she wore it with a quiet elegance that spoke of hard-earned success rather than ostentation. Her heels clicked against the polished concrete as she approached the doors of the VIP terminal. The glass doors slid open, and Amelia was met with a blast of warm air and the faint hum of soft jazz playing over the speakers. Her gaze swept the room, noting the plush leather seating, the sparkling chandelier, and the quiet efficiency with which attendants bustled about. This terminal, exclusive to private jet passengers, was a space designed for those who lived lives of excess. For Amelia, it was another step in a long journey of proving she belonged. She approached the reception desk, her back straight, her chin held high. Behind the counter sat a young woman, her blonde hair neatly tied back, her navy blazer immaculately pressed. The name tag pinned to her lapel read Fiona. Fiona glanced up briefly, her smile polite but thin, as if already dismissing Amelia before she spoke. "May I help you?" Fiona's tone was clipped, professional, but cold. Amelia smiled, her voice calm and steady. "Yes, I'm here to board my jet, the Horizon 1. Fiona's brow furrowed ever so slightly. Her eyes flicked over Amelia's tailored outfit, her expression betraying a sliver of doubt. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said after a pause. "This terminal is for VIP travelers only. Perhaps you're looking for the commercial terminal. It's just down the road." Amelia's smile didn't falter, though she felt the familiar sting of judgment prickle at the edges of her composure. "I believe I'm in the right place. The Horizon 1 is waiting for me." Fiona blinked, her polite mask slipping to reveal irritation. "I'm afraid I can't let you proceed without proper identification," she said, her voice sharper now. "Do you have a boarding pass or some proof of ownership?" Amelia reached into her briefcase and retrieved a sleek, leather-bound folder. From it, she produced a document and handed it to Fiona. "This should suffice," she said, her tone even, though her patience was beginning to wear thin. Fiona took the document and scanned it quickly, her lips pursed. "I'm sorry, but we'll need to verify this." She glanced over her shoulder and waved to a passing colleague. "Mr. Baker, could you come here for a moment?" A tall man in a charcoal suit approached, his graying hair neatly combed back. His name tag read Manager. "Mr. Baker looked at Amelia with the same measured politeness as Fiona, but there was a guardedness in his eyes that Amelia knew all too well. "Is there a problem here?" Mr. Baker asked, his voice dripping with authority. "This woman claims she's boarding a private jet, but I think there may be some confusion," Fiona explained, handing him the document. Mr. Baker took the paper, his gaze flickering over it. He didn't even bother hiding his skepticism. "Ma'am," he said, his tone patronizing, "we have strict protocols for this terminal. If you're unable to provide verifiable identification or credentials, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." Amelia inhaled deeply, willing herself to remain calm. She knew this game, had played it her entire life. "I've already provided the necessary documentation," she said, her voice steady. "Perhaps if you took the time to review it thoroughly." Mr. Baker cut her off with a dismissive wave. "I'm sorry, but I can't authorize your entry without proper verification. Security will escort you if needed." Amelia's jaw tightened, the heat of humiliation rising in her chest. Around her, the quiet murmur of the terminal had ceased. Other passengers were watching now, their curious eyes taking in the scene. "You won't need to escort me," Amelia said firmly, stepping back from the counter. Her voice carried a quiet authority that silenced even the whispers. She pulled her phone from her bag, her fingers moving with practiced precision. but you can be sure this matter will be resolved. Fiona and Mr. Baker exchanged uneasy glances as Amelia turned and walked away, her heels echoing sharply against the marble floor. Outside, she dialed a number, the tension in her shoulders releasing as the line connected. "It's me," she said, her voice calm but laced with steel. "We have a situation at the terminal. Leighton, handle it swiftly." She ended the call and stood by her car, the winter sun catching the edges of her diamond bracelet. Behind her, the glass doors of the terminal reflected her image, unbowed, unbroken. The storm she was about to unleash was brewing, and Amelia knew it would be a reckoning no one inside would forget. Amelia stood outside the terminal, her breath forming faint puffs in the crisp winter air. She leaned against her car, a picture of calm, though inside she simmered. Her phone rested in her hand, its polished screen catching the sunlight. Every now and then, she glanced back at the glass doors, where Fiona and Mr. Baker stood just inside, their postures stiff, their smug confidence still intact. They hadn't realized the gravity of their mistake, not yet. The minutes ticked by slowly, but Amelia was in no hurry. She had spent years perfecting patience in the face of disrespect, learning how to let her silence speak louder than her words. Her mother always told her, when they don't see your worth, don't shout, show them. That lesson had carried her through boardrooms filled with doubters, negotiations with skeptics, and moments just like this. The hum of an approaching convoy pulled Amelia from her thoughts. She turned her head slightly as 3 black SUVs rolled into the VIP lot, their engines a low, steady growl. The lead car came to a stop directly in front of her, and a man in a tailored navy suit stepped out. His presence was commanding, his movements sharp and deliberate. "Miss Horton," he greeted, his tone a mix of respect and urgency. "We received your call." Amelia offered a small nod. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Lewis. Is everything ready?" "Absolutely," he replied, his gaze firm. "Your instructions have been followed to the letter. We've brought the audit team, and our legal counsel is on standby." Amelia's lips curled into a faint, satisfied smile. "Good. Let's make this efficient." As the other SUVs parked, more individuals emerged, each one impeccably dressed and carrying an air of authority. Some carried briefcases, others had electronic tablets at the ready. Their synchronized movements were as precise as clockwork, and their arrival did not go unnoticed. Through the glass doors, Fiona and Mr. Baker were now visibly uneasy, their earlier arrogance beginning to falter. Amelia straightened, smoothing the front of her coat. She motioned for her team to follow and walked toward the terminal with unhurried steps, each click of her heels on the pavement deliberate and steady. When she reached the entrance, she paused, letting the automatic doors slide open before stepping inside. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The soft jazz and muted conversations were drowned out by the weight of her presence and the entourage flanking her. Passengers, who had been lounging with an air of entitlement, now sat up straighter, their curiosity piqued. Fiona froze mid-sentence, her face draining of color as she locked eyes with Amelia. "Miss Horton," Mr. Lewis began, his voice cutting through the silence. "Do you require an introduction, or shall I handle the formalities?" Amelia shook her head, her gaze fixed on Mr. Baker, who stood rooted behind the desk. "I think I can handle this myself." She stepped forward, her movements smooth and deliberate. The hush in the room grew heavier, as though everyone was collectively holding their breath. Amelia stopped in front of the reception desk, placing her briefcase on the counter with a quiet thud. "Fiona, isn't it?" Amelia asked, her tone as light as silk. Fiona nodded stiffly, her throat working as though she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. "And Mr. Baker," Amelia continued, her gaze shifting to the manager. "It seems you've both gone to great lengths to ensure I'm not mistakenly allowed into this terminal. Is that correct?" Mr. Baker tried to recover his composure, his voice wavering as he replied. "Miss Horton, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We were simply following protocol." Amelia raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. The gesture was subtle but commanding. "Protocol? Interesting. Tell me, Mr. Baker, what protocol justifies denying entry to a documented passenger without verifying their credentials?" Mr. Baker opened his mouth to respond, but Amelia didn't give him the chance. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a leather-bound file. With deliberate precision, she placed it on the counter and opened it, revealing a set of documents stamped with official seals. "These," she said, tapping the papers, "are the operational agreements for this terminal. Do you know who signed them?" Fiona and Mr. Baker exchanged nervous glances, neither dared to answer. Amelia leaned in slightly, her voice dropping just enough to make everyone strain to listen. "I did." The silence in the room was deafening. A few passengers exchanged wide-eyed looks, whispering behind their hands. Fiona visibly paled, her earlier confidence crumbling like brittle paper. "I own this terminal," Amelia continued, her tone icy now. "And I'm also the primary shareholder of the private aviation company that oversees its operations." Fiona's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Mr. Baker stumbled over his words, trying to form an excuse. "Miss Horton, I assure you, this was all a misunderstanding. If we had known." Amelia straightened, her gaze cutting through him like a blade. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to find out. Instead, you relied on your assumptions about who belongs here and who doesn't. That, Mr. Baker, is unacceptable." As she spoke, Mr. Lewis stepped forward, holding a clipboard. "Per Miss Horton's instructions, we are commencing a full audit of this terminal's operations," he announced, his voice clear and authoritative. "Effective immediately, all personnel will be under review. Any employee found to have violated company policies regarding professionalism and inclusivity will face termination." The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Fiona looked as though she might faint. Mr. Baker's face flushed red with a mix of embarrassment and anger, though he wisely kept his mouth shut. Amelia's voice softened, though it lost none of its edge. "You both will receive official notices of termination before the end of the day. Security will escort you off the premises. Consider this your final lesson in what it means to treat others with respect." With that, she stepped back, her gaze sweeping the room one last time. "Let this be a reminder," she said, addressing not just Fiona and Mr. Baker but everyone within earshot. "Assumptions and prejudices have no place in this world. Change starts here, and it starts now." Amelia turned and walked away, her team falling in step behind her. The room remained silent, as the weight of her words settled like a storm. Justice had arrived, swift and undeniable, leaving no room for doubt, and Amelia Horton had ensured they would never forget it. The sound of Amelia's heels striking the polished floors faded as she exited the terminal, yet the silence she left behind was louder than any reprimand, resonating in the stunned faces of those who remained. Fiona stood frozen, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the reception desk. Mr. Baker, his face a mixture of disbelief and humiliation, clutched the papers Amelia had left behind as though they might burn his fingers. In the terminal lounge, passengers exchanged whispered murmurs, their eyes darting between Fiona and Mr. Baker. The air was thick with unspoken judgments, curiosity, and the undeniable awareness that they had just witnessed something profound, something larger than a simple reprimand. Outside, Amelia leaned against her car, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The convoy of SUVs remained parked nearby, their engines humming softly. Her team milled about with quiet efficiency, making phone calls, checking documents, and preparing for the next steps. Despite the chill in the air, Amelia felt a quiet warmth in her chest, a mixture of satisfaction and resolve. Mr. Lewis approached, his shoes crunching against the gravel as he came to stand beside her. "Miss Horton," he began, his tone both respectful and measured. "The audit team is conducting interviews with the remaining staff as we speak. We'll have preliminary findings within the hour." Amelia nodded but kept her eyes on the distant sky. "Thank you, Mr. Lewis. And the legal team? They're already drafting formal notices for the terminations," he replied. "As per your instructions, we're documenting everything thoroughly to avoid any disputes. The staff involved will be escorted off the premises before the close of business." She turned to him then, her expression softer but no less resolute. "Good. I want this handled with precision, but also with compassion where it's warranted. Not everyone here is complicit in what happened today." "Of course, Mr. Lewis agreed. "We'll ensure fairness throughout the process." Amelia's gaze drifted back to the terminal, her thoughts heavy. She had achieved much in her life, more than most would have thought possible for a woman who had faced systemic barriers at every turn. But moments like this, when prejudice reared its ugly head, reminded her of how much work still needed to be done. Fiona was the first to break the suffocating silence, her voice thin and shaky, barely carried beyond the desk. I didn't know," she stammered, more to herself than anyone else. "How was I supposed to know who she was?" "Mr. Baker shot her a sharp look, his tone low but biting. "It doesn't matter who she was. What matters is how you treated her, how we treated her." Fiona's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. I thought she was lying. I thought she didn't belong here." And that, a voice interrupted, firm and cutting, "is exactly the problem." Both Fiona and Mr. Baker turned to see one of Amelia's legal representatives standing nearby, a man with sharp features and an air of quiet authority. He held a tablet in one hand, his gaze unwavering. "It's not your job to determine who belongs. It's your job to serve every passenger with professionalism and respect. You failed." Fiona opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. She felt the weight of her actions pressing down on her like an anvil. The legal representative didn't wait for a response. He gestured to two uniformed security officers standing nearby. "Please escort these two individuals off the premises. Their termination notices will follow shortly." Fiona's tears spilled over as she was gently but firmly led away. Mr. Baker, though visibly shaken, squared his shoulders and walked with a stiff, mechanical gait. Neither of them looked back. Amelia watched as the security officers emerged, escorting Fiona and Mr. Baker toward the parking lot. She didn't gloat or revel in their humiliation. Instead, she felt a quiet sadness. It wasn't just about holding people accountable. It was about challenging the deeper, insidious beliefs that allowed such behavior to persist. "Miss Horton," Mr. Lewis said, drawing her attention. "The remaining staff have been briefed. Some were visibly shaken but expressed gratitude for the chance to continue under your leadership." Amelia exhaled slowly, a small smile touching her lips. "Good. They deserve that chance. Let them prove they're better than the culture they've been part of." As the SUVs began to line up for departure, Amelia turned to Mr. Lewis one last time. "I'll leave you to oversee the final stages of this process. Ensure that new training programs are implemented immediately. I want this terminal to become a model for inclusivity and professionalism." "Understood, Mr. Lewis replied. "And your flight, ma'am? Shall I inform the crew you'll be boarding soon?" Amelia hesitated, glancing back at the terminal. The day had been draining, but necessary. She knew she couldn't rest yet. "Yes," she said finally. "Let's not keep the Horizon 1 waiting." As Amelia settled into the luxurious leather seat of her private jet, the hum of the engines filled the cabin. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, replaying the day's events in her mind. Justice had been served, but the victory felt bittersweet. It was a reminder of how far society still had to go. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts, and a flight attendant appeared at her side, offering her a steaming cup of herbal tea. "Miss Horton," the attendant said with a warm smile, "please let us know if there's anything else you need." Amelia opened her eyes and smiled back, her voice soft but firm. "Thank you. This is perfect." As the jet taxied down the runway and lifted into the sky, Amelia gazed out the window at the world below. The battle she had fought today was one of many, but she knew she wouldn't stop. The path to change was long, but she was determined to walk it, one step at a time. The rhythmic hum of the jet engines filled the cabin, a steady counterpoint to the storm swirling inside Amelia's mind. The tea in her hand had grown cold, untouched. She stared out the window at the endless stretch of clouds, her reflection faint, visible against the glass. But it wasn't her own face she saw. It was the faces of Fiona and Mr. Baker, frozen in the moment their worlds had unraveled. Amelia's grip on the delicate porcelain cup tightened for a moment before she set it down carefully on the polished table beside her. She had won, yes, but it didn't feel like victory. Instead, it felt like a skirmish in an endless war, one where the same battles would play out over and over unless something changed. Unbeknownst to Amelia, the fallout from her actions was still unfolding. As Fiona and Mr. Baker were escorted to their cars, the staff they left behind were grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. The terminal lounge buzzed with hushed conversations, the passengers' curiosity stoked by the dramatic turn of events. In a small, dimly lit break room, a group of staff members sat in tense silence. Among them was a young man named Kelvin, a baggage handler who had been working at the terminal for 3 years. Kelvin wasn't surprised by what had happened to Fiona and Mr. Baker. He'd seen their behavior before, though never so openly. What did they expect? Kelvin muttered, breaking the silence. His words were met with a mix of nods and uneasy glances. Another staff member, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, wrung her hands nervously. "It's not just them," she said quietly. "The way this place runs, it's all about appearances, who looks the part, who doesn't." Kelvin leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "And we've all let it happen. We've looked the other way, kept our mouths shut because we were afraid. Afraid of losing our jobs, afraid of rocking the boat." Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but she nodded. "What do we do now?" she whispered. Kelvin's gaze hardened. "We start by not being afraid anymore." Amelia's jet landed smoothly on the tarmac of her destination. She stepped off the aircraft with her usual poise, but her thoughts remained heavy. The car waiting for her was sleek and black, the driver silent as he opened the door for her. She slid into the back seat, the soft leather cool against her palms. As the car pulled away, Amelia's phone buzzed in her purse. She retrieved it and glanced at the screen. It was a message from Mr. Lewis. "Audit underway. Preliminary findings indicate deeper systemic issues. We'll share full report soon." Amelia sighed, her thumb hovering over the screen. She didn't reply. Instead, she closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the seat. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, heavier than ever. That evening, Amelia attended a dinner meeting with a group of high-profile investors. The restaurant was a private venue, its ambience opulent but understated. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the room, and the soft murmur of conversation filled the air. Amelia sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her smile polite but distant. The investors, mostly older men, spoke in low, measured tones about profits, projections, and the future of the private aviation industry. "You've done remarkable work with the company, Miss Horton," one of them said, raising his glass in a toast. "Your leadership is unparalleled." Amelia inclined her head graciously. "Thank you, but leadership isn't just about profits. It's about people, ensuring that everyone, from our employees to our customers, is treated with dignity and respect." The room fell quiet for a moment. The investors exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from mild interest to veiled skepticism. One man, a silver-haired executive named Mr. Whitman, leaned forward slightly. "You've always had a strong stance on these issues, Amelia," he said. "But isn't there a danger in focusing too much on inclusivity? The market can be unforgiving when priorities shift." Amelia's gaze sharpened, her calm exterior cracking just enough to reveal the fire beneath. "Inclusivity isn't a distraction, Mr. Whitman, it's a necessity. A business that fails to value its people, truly value them, will eventually fail altogether. That's a reality, not a risk." Her words hung in the air, challenging, unyielding. Mr. Whitman leaned back, his expression unreadable, but he didn't argue further. The conversation shifted back to safer topics, but Amelia knew she had left a mark. Late that night, Amelia sat alone in her hotel room, the city skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. She had shed her polished armor, the tailored dress, the heels, and now sat barefoot in a plush armchair, wearing a simple robe. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email. The subject line read, "Initial audit findings, urgent." Amelia opened it, her eyes scanning the document. The findings were worse than she had anticipated. Discrimination wasn't just an isolated incident at the terminal. It was a symptom of a deeper, systemic problem within the organization. Hiring practices, staff training, customer service protocols, all of it needed a complete overhaul. She set the phone down, her hands trembling slightly. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all. The fight ahead would be long and grueling. There would be resistance, from within and without. But Amelia knew she couldn't stop now. She had to keep pushing, keep fighting, because this wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel small, invisible, or unwelcome. Taking a deep breath, Amelia rose from the chair and walked to the window. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, her reflection staring back at her, a woman unbowed, unbroken, and ready for the battles to come. "Change starts here," she whispered to herself, "and it starts with me." The early morning light filtered through the tall windows of Amelia's hotel room. painting the space in muted golds and soft shadows. She stood at the window, her robe cinched tightly around her waist, a cup of black coffee cradled in her hands. The city below was already alive with movement, cars weaving through crowded streets, pedestrians rushing to meet their day. It felt strangely distant to Amelia, as though the hum of life outside was in a different world from the one she inhabited. Her thoughts were heavy with the weight of the audit findings. She had spent most of the night reading through the preliminary report, dissecting every line, every statistic, every account of mistreatment that had gone unnoticed or worse, unaddressed. It wasn't just about Fiona or Mr. Baker anymore. This was a systemic failure, and as the head of the company, it was her failure too. She took a sip of her coffee, the bitterness grounding her, and turned back to the desk where her laptop sat open. Emails had piled up overnight, but one message stood out, flagged and marked urgent. It was from her executive assistant, Nora. Subject: Critical Media Inquiry. Amelia, the incident at the terminal has reached the media. Multiple outlets are requesting statements. Some have already run stories based on eyewitness accounts. Call me when you're ready to discuss. Nora. Amelia closed her eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. Of course, the story would make its way to the media. In today's world, nothing remained private for long, especially not an incident as public and charged as the one at the terminal. She knew the headlines already. CEO confronts racism at her own company. Discrimination scandal rocks VIP terminal. They would frame her as either the hero or the villain, with little room for nuance. She set the coffee cup down and tapped her fingers lightly against the desk, her mind working through the implications. She needed to get ahead of the narrative, but not in the way the media team would suggest. This wasn't about damage control, it was about accountability. Amelia arrived at her company's downtown office building just after 9 a.m. The lobby was a sleek expanse of marble and glass, bustling with employees who paused briefly as she walked through. Some offered polite nods or murmured greetings, while others simply watched her pass, their faces betraying a mixture of respect and unease. She took the elevator to the executive floor, the silence inside the car amplifying the soft ding of each passing level. When the doors opened, Nora was already waiting for her, a clipboard in hand and an air of calm efficiency. "Good morning, Amelia," Nora said, falling into step beside her as they walked toward Amelia's office. "I've prepared a summary of the media coverage so far, along with recommendations from the PR team. They're suggesting a formal statement by noon." Amelia nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. "Schedule a meeting with the senior leadership team for 10 o'clock, she said. "I want everyone in the boardroom." Nora hesitated. "Should I invite PR?" "No," Amelia replied firmly. "This isn't about managing the story, it's about fixing the problem." The senior leadership team sat around the long mahogany table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. Amelia entered the room with her usual composure, her presence commanding attention. She placed a folder on the table and remained standing, her gaze sweeping over the group. "I won't waste your time," she began, her voice calm but resolute. "As you're all aware, an incident occurred at one of our terminals yesterday. What some of you may not know is that this incident wasn't an isolated case of poor judgment by a few employees. It's part of a larger pattern, a failure in our company's culture and systems that we can no longer ignore." She opened the folder and began distributing copies of the audit's preliminary findings. This report outlines numerous instances of discrimination, both implicit and explicit, across multiple locations. It highlights gaps in our hiring practices, our training programs, and our accountability measures. As the leadership team skimmed the pages, murmurs rippled through the room. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others exchanged nervous glances. Amelia continued, her voice steady but firm. "This isn't just a PR issue. It's a moral issue. And as the leader of this company, I take full responsibility. But responsibility isn't enough. Action is required." She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering the next blow. "Effective immediately, we will be overhauling our policies and procedures from the ground up. That includes mandatory training on diversity and inclusion for all employees, starting with this leadership team." One of the executives, an older man named David, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Amelia, while I understand the seriousness of this situation, isn't this a bit drastic? Changes like these could disrupt operations." Amelia cut him off with a sharp look. Drastic is exactly what's needed, David. Disruption is a small price to pay for creating a company that treats everyone with the dignity and respect they deserve. The room fell silent again, the tension palpable. Amelia knew she was asking for more than just compliance. She was demanding transformation, and not everyone in the room would welcome it. Amelia sat alone in her office, the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The day had been long, filled with difficult conversations and resistance from some corners of the organization. But there had also been moments of hope, employees who expressed gratitude, leaders who showed a willingness to change. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was a text from Kelvin, the baggage handler at the terminal. Miss Horton, thank you for what you did yesterday. It meant more than you know. Some of us have been waiting for this change for a long time. We're ready to help however we can. Kelvin. Amelia smiled faintly, her shoulders relaxing for the first time all day. Change was never easy, but it was possible, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for her company, but for the people it served. She set the phone down and turned her gaze back to the city. There was still so much work to be done, but she was ready to face it, step by step. Choice by choice, she would forge a path forward, one where justice wasn't just an ideal but a reality. The clock in Amelia's office chimed softly, signaling the close of another day. Outside her window, the city's skyline shimmered under a blanket of twilight, its lights twinkling like stars. Inside, however, the air was heavy with the aftermath of the day's events. Amelia sat at her desk, her posture upright, but her gaze distant. Papers lay scattered before her, a chaotic collage of audit findings, action plans, and notes from the senior leadership meeting. Her thoughts drifted back to the terminal, back to the faces of Fiona and Mr. Baker as their worlds unraveled. She hadn't intended for it to play out so publicly, but then again, perhaps it needed to. Change often required a reckoning, a raw, unfiltered confrontation with the truth. The soft knock at her door drew her back to the present. "In," she said, her voice steady. Nora stepped inside, a tablet tucked under her arm. "Amelia, I know it's late, but there's something you need to see." Amelia gestured for her to sit, her curiosity piqued. Nora settled into the chair opposite her and placed the tablet on the desk. She tapped the screen, pulling up a video. "It's from a passenger who was at the terminal yesterday. They posted it online, and it's already gone viral." Amelia's jaw tightened. "Let me guess, a dramatized account of what happened." "Not exactly," Nora said, turning the screen toward her. "Just watch." The video began with shaky footage of the terminal lounge. The camera captured Amelia standing at the reception desk, her posture poised but her tone sharp as she addressed Mr. Baker. The caption read, "When the CEO confronts racism at her own company." The person filming could be heard murmuring to someone nearby, "This is unreal. She owns the place, and they're treating her like this?" The video continued, capturing Amelia's calm but firm demeanor as she laid out her authority. The comments below the video were a flurry of reactions. "This is what leadership looks like." "She didn't yell, didn't lose her cool. Total class act. I can't believe this still happens in 2024. Shameful." The clip ended with Amelia turning away from the desk, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Nora paused the video. "It's everywhere, Amelia. News outlets have picked it up, and public opinion is overwhelmingly in your favor. People are calling you a role model for addressing discrimination head-on." Amelia leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "And what about the company? Are they praising our response or condemning it?" "A bit of both," Nora admitted. "Some are questioning how this could happen in one of our terminals, but most are applauding the steps you're taking to fix it. The transparency seems to be working in our favor for now." Amelia folded her hands on the desk, her mind racing. She had never sought the spotlight, but it seemed to find her anyway. The question was, how would she use it? Amelia arrived at the terminal just after dawn, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. She had come unannounced, dressed in a simple coat and scarf, her usual entourage conspicuously absent. Inside, the terminal was quieter than it had been during her last visit. Only a few early travelers occupied the lounge, their conversations muted. Amelia scanned the room, her eyes landing on Kelvin, the young baggage handler she'd heard from the night before. He was unloading a cart of suitcases near the check-in counter, his movements efficient but weary. She approached him slowly, her voice soft but clear. "Kelvin?" He turned, startled, and quickly straightened. "Miss Horton, I didn't expect to see you here." Amelia smiled faintly. "I didn't announce my visit. I wanted to get a sense of things without the usual fanfare." Kelvin nodded, his hands fidgeting at his sides. "Things are quieter today. People are still talking about what happened. Some are nervous, others are hopeful." "And you?" Amelia asked, her gaze steady. "How are you feeling?" Kelvin hesitated, then spoke with a quiet intensity. "I'm grateful for what you did. It wasn't easy to watch, but it needed to happen. People like Fiona and Mr. Baker, they've been here too long without being held accountable. But now, I think people are starting to believe that things can change." Amelia placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice firm. "Change doesn't come from me alone, Kelvin. It comes from people like you. People who are willing to stand up and make their voices heard. Keep speaking up. Keep pushing for what's right. You have more power than you realize." Kelvin nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "I will, Miss Horton. I promise." Later that day, Amelia gathered the terminal staff in the main lounge for a town hall meeting. They stood in a loose semicircle, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Amelia stood before them, her posture relaxed but commanding. "I asked you all here today because I want to be transparent about what's happening," she began. "Yesterday's incident wasn't just a failure on the part of a few individuals. It was a symptom of deeper issues within our company, issues that I am committed to addressing." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This terminal, like every other part of our organization, will undergo changes. Some of those changes will be challenging, but they are necessary. Discrimination in any form will no longer be tolerated, and that starts with me, holding myself accountable, as well as all of you." A hand went up in the crowd, a middle-aged woman with a nervous expression. "What does that mean for us? Are we all under scrutiny now?" Amelia met her gaze evenly. "It means we all have a role to play in creating a better environment. For those who are willing to learn, grow, and do better, you'll have my full support. For those who resist or refuse to change, there will be consequences." The room was silent, the weight of her words pressing down like a storm cloud. But in that silence, Amelia saw something else, a spark of resolve, a flicker of hope. Change wouldn't come easily, but it had begun, and this time, there would be no turning back. The days that followed the town hall were marked by a quiet unease that rippled through the terminal. Amelia's words hung in the air like an impending storm, their weight pressing down on those who had grown complacent. Some embraced the coming changes, their optimism tempered by the fear of what it might cost them. Others resisted, their whispers forming an undercurrent of defiance that threatened to undo the progress before it had truly begun. Amelia stood in the observation deck of the terminal late one evening. The sprawling tarmac below, illuminated by rows of runway lights, planes taxied in and out, their silhouettes cutting through the night like shadows on a canvas. She often came here to think, to detach herself from the endless hum of meetings and plans. Tonight, though, her solitude was interrupted. The sound of approaching footsteps drew her attention. She turned to see David, the senior executive who had challenged her during the board meeting, standing a few feet away. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, his posture tense but resolute. "Miss Horton," he began, his voice softer than usual. "Do you have a moment?" Amelia studied him for a moment before nodding. "Of course, David. What's on your mind?" He stepped closer, his gaze shifting to the tarmac as he spoke. "I wanted to speak candidly, off the record, about everything that's happening." Rebecca folded her arms, her expression calm but unreadable. "Go on." David sighed, the weight of his thoughts evident in the lines etched across his face. "I've been with this company for nearly 3 decades. I've seen it grow, seen it struggle, and I've done my part to keep it afloat. But this push for change you're leading, it's moving fast, too fast." Amelia's brow furrowed slightly, though her voice remained measured. "Change rarely waits for comfort, David, and in this case, it's long overdue." "I'm not saying we don't need change," he said quickly, his tone almost pleading, "but the way you're going about it, it's alienating people. Staff who've been here for years feel like they're being punished for mistakes they didn't make. They're scared, Amelia, and fear isn't the foundation for progress." Amelia's gaze softened, though the resolve in her voice didn't waver. "I understand their fear, but fear alone won't stop what needs to happen. If we tread too lightly, if we let fear dictate our actions, we'll end up back where we started, and that's a place I refuse to return to. David nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. And what about those who won't change? The ones who see this as a threat, not an opportunity. Amelia's jaw tightened. She knew exactly who he was referring to. Resistance is inevitable, David, but the question isn't whether they'll resist, it's whether we have the strength to persevere despite it. David looked at her then, truly looked, and saw the unwavering determination in her eyes. He nodded again, this time with a hint of respect. I hope you're right, Amelia, for all our sakes. The next morning, Amelia's assistant, Nora, entered her office with a furrowed brow and a folder clutched to her chest. Amelia, seated at her desk, glanced up from her laptop and immediately sensed the tension in Nora's posture. Something on your mind, Nora? Amelia asked, gesturing for her to sit. Nora hesitated before placing the folder on the desk. I thought you should see this. It's an internal report about, well, let's call it pushback. Amelia opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. They detailed incidents of subtle defiance, employees refusing to attend mandatory training sessions, whispers of dissatisfaction among mid-level managers, and even rumors of a petition calling for Amelia to reconsider her sweeping reforms. Amelia leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled under her chin. How widespread is this, Nora? Nora sighed. It's hard to say, but it's enough to warrant concern. Some people feel like their jobs are at risk, others think the changes are unnecessary, and then there are those who, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, that who don't believe these changes are worth the effort. Amelia's expression darkened slightly. She closed the folder and rested her hands on top of it. Resistance was always part of the equation, Nora, but this isn't just about discomfort. It's about protecting a culture that should never have been allowed to exist in the first place. Nora nodded. I know you're right, but these people aren't going to make it easy for you. Amelia smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. I never expected them to. Later that day, Amelia convened a meeting with her leadership team. The room was filled with tension, the kind that clung to the air like static before a storm. Amelia stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding as she addressed the group. I've been made aware of the resistance to the changes we're implementing, she began, her voice calm but firm. I want to make one thing very clear. This is not a negotiation. The steps we're taking are non-negotiable. Her words were met with silence, save for the faint sound of pens tapping against notebooks. Amelia's gaze swept the room, her eyes lingering on the faces of those she suspected harbored doubts. I understand that change is uncomfortable, she continued. I understand that it challenges the way things have always been, but I also understand that without it, we stagnate, and stagnation, in this case, means perpetuating a system that is fundamentally broken. David, seated near the middle of the table, cleared his throat. Amelia, if I may, what about those who refuse to adapt? Those who outright reject the direction you're taking us? Amelia met his gaze without hesitation. Then they'll have no place here, David. This company is moving forward, and it will do so with or without them. Her words landed heavily, the room falling into an uneasy silence. Amelia let the quiet linger, allowing the weight of her resolve to settle over them. That evening, Amelia sat alone in her office, the day's events replaying in her mind. She knew she had drawn a line in the sand, and she knew not everyone would cross it with her. But for those who did, for those willing to embrace the future, she vowed to be a leader worth following. The city lights flickered beyond her window, a reminder of the world outside, a world still rife with the challenges she was fighting to overcome. She poured herself a glass of water, her movements slow and deliberate, and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The path ahead would not be easy, it never was, but Amelia Horton had never been one to back down from a fight, especially one as important as this. She set her glass down and turned back to her desk, her resolve sharper than ever. The storm was coming, and Amelia was ready. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and confrontations. Resistance continued to brew, subtle but potent, like the undertow of a storm. Amelia faced it head-on, her resolve unshaken, even as the whispers grew louder and the dissenters more emboldened. A month after the initial incident at the terminal, Amelia convened a meeting with the board of directors. She presented a comprehensive report on the changes implemented, including data on employee engagement, customer satisfaction, and early indicators of cultural improvement. Her presentation was met with a mix of skepticism and admiration, but when it came time for a vote of confidence in her leadership, the board's decision was unanimous. "You've turned a crisis into an opportunity," one board member said, his tone begrudgingly respectful. "I wasn't sure you could pull it off, but you've proven me wrong." Amelia accepted the praise with grace, though she knew the work was far from over. This victory was a milestone, not a finish line. On a quiet morning, weeks later, Amelia returned to the terminal where it had all begun. The lounge was bustling with activity, but the atmosphere was different. The staff moved with a renewed sense of purpose, their interactions marked by professionalism and warmth. Kelvin spotted her from across the room and waved, his smile wide and genuine. Amelia sat by the window, watching as the sun rose over the tarmac, its golden light spilling across the planes lined up like sentinels. She sipped her coffee, savoring the moment of peace. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe, to reflect. The journey had been exhausting, fraught with challenges that had tested her resolve. But as she looked around the terminal at the smiles, the efficiency, the sense of belonging, she knew it had been worth it. Change was never easy, but it was always necessary. As the sun climbed higher, Amelia stood and gathered her things. There was still work to be done, battles to fight, and systems to rebuild, but for now, she felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment that whispered of brighter days ahead. "Change starts here," she murmured to herself as she walked toward the exit. "And it doesn't stop with me." The glass doors slid open, and Amelia stepped into the light, ready to face whatever came next. And so, what began as a moment of prejudice turned into a powerful lesson in accountability and justice. This story reminds us that true change starts with courage, resilience, and standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more eye-opening tales that challenge and inspire. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.